Test 1, 2. Sega.
Hey folks, Fromark here once again with the Fromark Plays Show, and this time around I'm playing Comix. Originally released on August 2nd, 1995 for the Sega Genesis, but this is the PS3 port, which I'm playing off of Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection, which this game has been included on many different game collections, and it's still possible to play it even nowadays. But anyways, the plot here, New York City, present day. Here we have artist Sketch Turner sketching out his comic books late one night, when all of a sudden a bolt of lightning hits his comic page, and the enemy from the comic book, Mortis, comes out of the book. And then he puts Sketch in the book and decides, yo, the only way that I can kill you and take over your world is if I put you in the book and let you die in the book. So Sketch gets transported to his own comic book, which makes for an interesting plot for a game, but this is a pretty cool game, honestly. This game has so much charm and a lot going for it, even if it's a short game to get through. I'm gonna go ahead and point out now that this is only a two-part playthrough, unfortunately. It's one of those games that Sega back in the day made incredibly difficult to make up for the fact that it's a short game, kinda taking a page out of the NES playbook. But what you got here is a action platformer slash beat 'em up kind of game, and what you do is you're Sketch Turner and you go from panel to panel and page to page of his comic book, beating up enemies and eventually getting back to Mortis and stopping him from taking over Earth. But yeah, there's a lot of charm here. This game is really fun, honestly. This game is awesome. The soundtrack is 10 out of 10, the gameplay is solid, the controls are incredibly responsive no matter what version of it you're playing. Although, I don't know, there's a Game Boy Advance version that doesn't look very fun. It looks like it kind of messes up a lot of this one. But a lot of people don't like to count that version, so for the sake of it, let's just pretend that one doesn't exist. Well, what does exist is your sidekick buddy Roadkill the rat there. Now, rats are really cool, and I'm glad I finally get to talk about rats on the channel for a second, because I love rats. I don't have any of my own, but that was one of the bright spots of dating one of my exes, is that she had a bunch of rats, and I loved helping take care of those things. One of my friends has a couple of rats, too, one of my friends, and they're pretty cool. Rats are so cool, I love them. But at least I got my cat Scooter, and Scooter's awesome. This game is also awesome, and you'll notice there's a little bit of voice acting in it, which is pretty cool and kind of interesting considering it's a Sega Genesis game, and I feel like this game in every aspect pushes what the Sega Genesis can do. Sound-wise, graphics-wise, color-wise. It's a very bright and colorful game, and the soundtrack sounds so good. There's like an hour's worth of music in this game, folks. And it's all composed by the great Howard Drawson, who was Sega Technical Institute's sound guy at the time. And he did the theme song for Sonic and Knuckles, he did a couple of songs at Sonic Spinball, and he did some other stuff here and there, but I feel like Comix Zone is like his shining moment. But yeah, that takes care of the first part of the game. However, this game, I mentioned that it's kind of short. It's only 3 levels long technically, but each level is broken up into pages. So there's a couple of pages in each level. But the levels are called episodes. And it really is a shame that this game is short. It was kind of rushed out to the market, unfortunately. There were 5 levels planned for this game initially, and 2 of them were cut for time constraints. But it still turned out to be a pretty solid game for that fact. I mean, there's a lot here. There's a lot of charm here, and it's a pretty fun game to get through. I'd highly recommend this game. However, if you're a beginner with it, it is really difficult, and a lot of people have been put off by its crazy difficulty. It takes a little bit to get used to, and really the thing that makes this game the most difficult is just the fact that you don't get very many lives. in this first level alone, you start out with 1 life. So if you die in the first level, it's game over. No continues, no continues. But you get a second life when you get to level 2, and then you get a third life when you get to the final episode. But still, that's not very much, and that's really the main thing that makes this game difficult. I mean, once you get used to it, like me here, you'll see that you can get through it in just a little over a half hour. Good ending and bad ending, of course. But yeah, I want to touch on the soundtrack a little bit again. It's composed by Howard Drossen, and I bring that up saying that this is like his shining moment, in my opinion. I'm a pretty big fan of some of his work, though. Like, he did a soundtrack EP for this game that was included in some versions of the game's release. However, it wasn't included with the North American Genesis release, which is kind of lame. However, you'll notice that every box of the game says bonus CD. There is a bonus soundtrack CD that is included with original releases of the game, but it is not that soundtrack EP. But anyways, Drossen put together a band in just a couple of days and called it Roadkill after the pet rat in the game. And it's only 6 songs long, but they're all pretty good, and some of them do definitely resemble what their in-game counterparts are. Like the upcoming boss theme, that one's kind of resembles it. Yeah, man, actually almost right there to the episode 1 boss. But yeah, Drossen was like Sega's sound guy in the 90s, and interesting fact, that band Roadkill that he put together, the lead singer on most of those tracks, his name was Tim P. And him and Drossen were in a band called Flies on Fire in the late 80s, before Drossen went to Sega Technical Institute. And those 2 albums that Flies on Fire did are definitely worth checking out. They're kind of, I mean, they're nothing super special compared to a lot of other bands, but it's definitely it's a good listen for both of those albums. I'd definitely compare them to stuff like the Black Crowes, Georgia Satellites, The Cult. Definitely kind of but I don't quite understand why they never got big, to be honest. Like, they sound better than a lot of bands of that era that made it. But it's kind of like with this game. I don't understand too much why it didn't get big. I mean, it was made by the studio that did Sonic 2, 3, Knuckles, and Spinball, and also did the Ooze, that's a game that I'm not really sure if I can't get into. I mean, I've tried, but I just can't get into the Ooze. But yeah, I'm not sure what that enemy's name was, but that was the Stage 1 boss, and that's the end of Episode 1, folks. Yeah, Episode 2, Welcome to the Temple. But yeah, so this is the Himalayas. Ooh, looks like during the recording process I earned a trophy, as I am playing the PS3 version of Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection. Now, one cool thing about Roadkill I wanted to point out here is if you release him back into the wild, sometimes he can pick up random items hidden behind the pages. I'm not really a fan of this enemy here, Styx the monk. He shows up in this stage, and it's mostly just because he gets super defensive. He's kind of hard to take down sometimes. And then he's got like this pogo stick jump that he can do, and it's just super annoying. But he does a scream whenever you take him down. It kind of sounds like Barney from The Simpsons. Hey, Homer! That was a terrible impression. I'm never going to do that again. But anyways, you get the idea. But yeah, this game is it's an amazing experience. Just everything about it's a wonderful game, and it's a shame that it didn't get much attention back in the day. It seems like what happened was Sega had their hands full with way too many projects at the time, and the Sega Genesis was nearing the end of its life cycle, and Sega of America had their hands full with the CD, the Genesis, the 32X, the Game Gear, the Pico, and then the upcoming Saturn. So they didn't really know what the hell they were doing at the time. They had so many eggs in their baskets, and it was like, I mean, there were so many great games on the Genesis that should have got more press and should have got better sales and better reception like this. Seems like the Vector Man games did okay. People seem to remember those a little bit better. But games like Comix Zone and the Woes, which were made by Sega Technical Institute, they didn't really sell too well. However, at least Sega could always count on the Sonic games to sell well. Unfortunately, Sega Technical Institute were supposed to do Sonic Extreme for the Saturn, and some of the people who worked on Comix Zone were actually part of that project, and unfortunately that project never came to be, and well, the game never came to be. And ooh, back to the soundtrack. This song kicks ass. This one's one of my favorites. But I love this part. It's a temple section where you just gotta battle most of the enemies you've encountered up to this point. But yeah, everything about this game screams 90s Sega, and I absolutely love it. It's a shame it'll probably never get a sequel, but I mean, there's plenty of games though that Sega's just completely forgotten that they ever existed, like Echo the Dolphin, Comix Zone, Rise Stars. Knights probably could have been a pretty decent franchise. At least Knights got a second game. Rise Star never got a second game. Comix Zone never got one. Comix Zone was supposed to get a game on the Saturn, but it never properly materialized. But yeah, part of the Sonic Extreme project just ended up being doomed because of the so many eggs in the baskets, and Sega of America was just overworking themselves into the ground, and having to restart the project and shifting it from 32X to Saturn, and then dealing with a lot of turnover and inexperience and hardware limitations. It just made for a really disastrous time. And one thing I didn't really understand is that some of the other Comix Zone people were staffed to make a different Sonic game for the Saturn that wasn't Sonic Extreme, and then that never materialized, so that was just kind of a complete waste of time. Those people could have worked on Sonic Extreme, and they probably could have gotten something done with them, because those people were Peter Morawek, the guy who basically came up with this game and did a lot of the programming and did a lot of the stuff for Spinball. If he was like one of the main guys on the Sonic Extreme team from day one, I feel like they probably would have gotten something done pretty quickly. Especially considering a game like Comix Zone that was put together under a pretty tight crunch, and then Sonic Spinball was put together in a matter of months, and those two games are pretty good games. Which I did a Sonic Spinball playthrough over on the channel here at one point. Go check that out if you haven't. But yep, on to the next page of episode 2. Not really a fan of this section just because you gotta deal with these bats here. But I like the song. It's kind of a slower one. It seems like more of a ballad type. To me, it evokes... I'm surprised it's not raining and it's not darker in this level, because that's what it evokes. It evokes like a darker, rainy kind of night. But I like that about the soundtrack. There's a lot of dark, heavier, grungy kind of things going on, and that's definitely evoked in the Roadkill EP. Which Roadkill EP is pretty cool because even though it didn't get a chance to be released over here on the bonus CD, at least it did make it out in the wild as part of the Sega Tunes box set, which was the box set that included a bunch of other Sega games and their soundtracks. It still doesn't really make much sense why they didn't just put the EP on the bonus CD instead of a random sampler. Plus, you would have think that probably would have saved a lot more money to just go with the soundtrack EP. Because, I mean, getting the rights for a big record label and their fancy songs, and I mean, those Roadkill songs, they rock. They're pretty good. Go check those out. There's even one that features a surprising Drawson vocal. It's probably the only time you can ever hear Howard Drawson sing on anything. Seen It for Days, which is one of the songs in episode 1. I always like the voice sample of the Strigil or Strigil or Sturgill or whatever the enemy's supposed to be. When he shoots those fireballs, he's like, burn, burn. Now you gotta kick these worms. You gotta kick these worms out of the way as you drop down this well. Drop that bomb. There's plenty of neat power-ups in this game, like the power glove that turns Sketch into Super Sketch for a minute and kills all the enemies on the page. And then you got the bomb, which you seen me throw at Big Mama, the boss from episode 1. These punching bags are pretty neat. Oh, this is one of the songs on the Roadkill EP. 10,000 Knives. This song's really good. Both the soundtrack and the game version, both are really good. So like I said, 10 out of 10 game, 10 out of 10 soundtrack. I mean, this game, it's more than just a game in my opinion, it's an experience. I feel like the soundtrack really adds to the experience of it. And there's just so much charm and character that it just feels like more than a game. And I wish it would have sold better. I wish it got a better reception. I wish it was a better remembered Sega game, but it's got an audience. And that's the cool thing about Sega. They're kind of that company that has a lot of those kind of franchises that have small followings who remember stuff. Speaking of remembering stuff, I don't remember whether or not Big Mama was the episode 1 boss's name, but this is Kung Fung. And you gotta avoid his fingernail attacks, where he shoots spikes out of his fingernails, and then you gotta avoid these water attacks. And then, if you can kick him into the spikes 3 times, that will kill him quickly. Otherwise, just be kicking him around a little bit. He is also voiced by Howard Drawson, which, this voice doesn't really fit a Kung Fu master, in my opinion. It sounds very not Kung Fu-y to me. It's like, your Kung Fu is good. But this boss theme is really good, and this game is really good. Oh yeah, I like how Sketch says stuff like, come on, when he idles too long. It's kind of like how Sonic does stuff if he idles too long. Uh-oh, my health is in the red. See what I can do, though. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's it, folks. Yeah, that's gonna do it for Kung Fung. That's gonna do it for episode 2. I guess that's gonna do it for part 1, and since this is a pretty short game, I'll see you in episode 3, the finale of the game.